Welcome everyone to Wrasslin' Raw!
All right, you're listening to Wrasslin' Raw, the podcast that takes you back to when the new generation took over the WWF. Thank you for joining us. You're here with Ryan Arico.
Thank you, and, sorry I didn't have any source material for an opening line here today, so I'm just going to wish both of my co-hosts and the listeners a happy holidays, and a
I was hoping you'd bring it back. Joe Gimateo.
I am just excited for this tune-up episode for SummerSlam 95. I feel like an allied power.
Oh, my God. I'm the one and only Jason Bartlett, and ordinarily we would be examining WWE history one episode of Raw at a time, but no, tonight, this is our special Christmas episode. So, for all our listeners out there, this is something that we have been doing this will make 2 years in a row now. And I hope to continue doing it forever on into the future until we all die, because that's what's going to happen before Raws run out. So we've got a lot of things to think about here. So the rules for our listeners: each one of us has selected our Mount Crushmore. That means 3 things that we think are the top 3 of whatever their categories. So this could be finishing moves, this could be stables, this could be underrated wrestlers, which, by the way, are the 3 categories that we picked last year. But the key thing here is that we don't know what each other picked. So this is going to be a surprise for everybody. Last year, Joe went first. So this year, Ryan's going to go first. But before we do that, I just want to say I love you guys. Merry Christmas. And let's raise a drink here. How about it?
Hell yeah.
Got a drink hand here.
All right. Here's to you.
Cheers.
Delicious. Ryan, what did you get us this year?
Well, thank you. And so last year, I was the only one that went negative. I went with my worst finishers of all time. So this year, I decided to go with the opposite end of that, and I'm going to go with my 3 favorite finishers of all time.
Okay. All right. Stink face number 1, so just give us your 3 and 2.
Exactly. And, these aren't just my favorite finishers, but also the wrestlers and their particular blend of it. So my number 3 is Sweet Chin Music by Shawn Michaels. This move is, of course, made famous by Shawn Michaels' version of the super kick, which is sadly just a normal everyday move today. It's like a right hook at this point. But the super kick is believed to be created by gentleman Chris Adams, who was popular in the early and mid 80s for world-class championship wrestling out of Texas. However, this move was definitely made most popular by Shawn Michaels, and rightfully so. The way he delivered it was just amazing. The way it sounded, the energy he put behind it, and again, the fucking sound when it would hit. I mean, everyone in the crowd, when they saw him nail it, were screaming, "One more time!"
Yeah, and I always loved JR with the tuning up the band.
Yeah.
He's tuning up the band.
Yeah, when he'd start stomping his foot.
Yeah.
So, my number 2, this next one is probably a bit odd for me, but The Jackhammer by Goldberg. I was never really a huge Goldberg fan, and I really didn't watch WCW much, but this move and the way Goldberg delivered it was just the definition of raw power and aggression. Surprisingly, this heavyweight powerhouse move was created by a 5'3" Japanese woman back in the early 80s. She was named Jaguar Yokota.
Huh.
The original name of it was the Suplex Power Slam. But there's no mistaking this move was made most popular by Bill Goldberg, and the way he set it up with the vicious spear followed by the amazing looking jackhammer, it was a finish that was just always great to watch. And I also remember back in the WCW video games, it just being a great move, and it just looked great in a video game as well. Not to mention, he got some of the biggest guys in the business in this move, like Mark Henry, and probably one of the most memorable ones is the time he nailed it on the Giant. And, they didn't look bad at all. This is something we can't really say about with some finishers on some other big guys like Sid and Diesel. But what a great move. My number one, this should really come as no surprise to anyone because I am the resident asshole for The Undertaker. And my number one favorite finisher of all time is the Tombstone Pile Driver by The Undertaker. The Tombstone, of course, is a variation of the standard pile driver and is a somewhat safer version of it because of the person receiving the Tombstone's head is secured between their opponent's legs when the move's applied. The Tombstone is said to be created by Jack Polo in the 60s and was made famous by Andre the Giant in the late 70s, but the Tombstone Pile Driver was made iconic by the Dead Man. After his chokeslam setup followed by the Tombstone finish, there was really no one in the business that kicked out of the Phenom's finisher until the fantastic storyline that we're going to get to in a few years with his quote-unquote brother. Once The Undertaker nailed the Tombstone, the crowd were on their feet, screaming their guts out. They were always treated with a fantastic show after the finisher and pinfall. The lights would go out and the smoke and Taker getting on his one knee and raising his hand in the air when the most beautiful man in wrestling wails away, lifting the urn high above his head. I mean, my Lord, what a sight. I'm a grown-ass man and I still get chills watching some of these classic Undertaker Tombstone finishes. It's definitely my number one finisher of all time.
Nice. Are you sure it wasn't invented by Johnny Polo?
Johnny Polo. It was not.
Awesome list, Ryan. Yeah, I mean the Tombstone, it had to be number one on there.
Sure. For me, how could it be anything else?
Yeah, it's kind of funny that that's where you went because I have a semi-tangential connection to that there, but we'll get to that. We'll get there eventually. Joseph,
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, Joseph, what did you go with this year? What'd you get us?
Well, this year I have a positive as well. My Crushmore is my 3 favorite wrestler debuts.
Oh, okay.
Sting just made an appearance at AEW, and it kind of gave me the idea, I'm going to go with my 3 favorite debuts. So with that, I mean, just to clarify, the first time we saw a particular wrestler on a specific promotion, basically, since these guys kind of fucking go everywhere, ECW, right. WCW. So my 3 are all WWE in the 90s. Number 3 was The Big Show, debuting as Paul White on February 14th, 1999 at St. Valentine's Day Massacre pay-per-view. And this was we finally got the match between Vince McMahon and Stone Cold Steve Austin. This was, if you guys remember, this was the year that Vince won the Royal Rumble in 1999. Yeah. So
absolutely.
He gave up his spot to go to WrestleMania, but Stone Cold said, no, I don't think so. So they had a match. The Big Show comes up out of the ring, which I always kind of think that's a little cheesy sometimes, but I was a huge fucking fan of The Big Show as the Giant in WCW. Mm-hmm. So when I saw that, I definitely popped my ass off for sure.
Not to mention that I didn't really remember his debut until you said come up through the ring. And then I immediately remembered, oh, yes, I remember that.
Yeah, so he comes up through and he's throwing Austin around a little bit. Then he throws Austin out of the ring and Austin's feet hit the floor, so he won the match. It was a steel cage match. Number 2 is, that's gotta be Kane. The classic announcement from Vince McMahon, Bad Blood, 1997. I don't even need to say much about this. This is arguably the best storyline ever in wrestling.
It is great. I can't wait to get to it.
If it's not, it's top 3 for sure. For everybody, for every wrestling fan. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And they built Hell in a Cell just for this. Like, this is why they did Hell in a Cell, was for Kane to make his debut, and it was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And number 1 is Chris Jericho making his debut in WWE August 9th, 1999.
Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah.
He had the Millennial Countdown for weeks, and we're wondering, who the hell is this? I loved him in WCW, and he kind of carried that over into WWE when he cut his promo. And imagine how nerve-wracking it would be for Vince McMahon to tell you, all right, go out there and cut a promo on The Rock, you know, one of the top guys. It was just awesome. And I am a grown-ass man, and I get fucking chills when I see Jericho's name on the Titantron and hear that fucking crowd just explode when they see it. And if you watch this promo on YouTube, you can actually see it starts with The Rock cutting a promo on The Big Show. And then the Millennial Countdown starts, and you can see The Rock kind of like holding back a smile, like he knows this is going to be fucking awesome. And it's beautiful. The reason why I went with that as number 1 is because Jericho went out and cut a promo for like 4 or 5 minutes, where the other guys just kind of went in and beat somebody up for a little bit, and that was the end of it. But, you know, the common theme here with all 3 of these is these guys debuted working with a top guy. Big Show was with Stone Cold, Kane was with The Undertaker, and Jericho was with The Rock. So pretty good pattern there.
So, Joe, I got a quick question. Since I'm guessing, just watched some of these debuts.
Yeah.
That's my question. Y2J. Did he call himself Y2J in the very first one?
He did, and it's funny because JR and the King, Jerry Lawler was asking JR, like, did he just call himself Y2J?
It was just such a great fucking name for that time.
Jim Ross was like, well, he is an arrogant young man.
Thank you for that. That was pretty awesome. I definitely remember the Kane debut and Jericho, like it's etched into my mind. I did not remember the Big Show until you mentioned it there, kind of like Ryan, you know. I was always never that big on Big Show. I don't know. But you know what? Now that I am watching old episodes of Nitro and, you know, how heavily he plays into things there, I'm really starting to develop an appreciation for him. So,
well, he was in much better shape back
Yeah.
then, too.
Yeah.
He was much, much thinner and moved a lot better in the ring.
yeah.
And it was a little bit of a surprise at that time, too, you know, because he was getting a pretty heavy push as the Giant, and then all of a sudden he switches promotions. So it's pretty shocking.
Not too long after that, right, is when they do that really bad storyline with The Undertaker when he's the American badass and he's like trying to train the Giant to be mean.
I think that was like a couple years later. Yeah.
Was it a couple? Yeah, that was a low point. For
Well,
the Undertaker.
it's funny because the Big Show and Jericho, both of those guys had awesome debuts, but it was total shit right after that for like a year or two, you know, till they really got a good push.
Yeah.
Well, I went with, and this is something that has kind of come up here and there, and in some of the wrestling podcasts that I listen to, has really forced me to kind of face this and think about it and come up with yet another positive. So we're 3 for 3 on positives this year. I decided to get you guys my personal favorite managers that aren't Paul Bearer. And that's the qualifier. That's why I said connection to you there, Ryan, because I mean, that's kind of obvious, right? The Paul Bearer is for people our age that, you know, missed out on the territory system and only had really, you know, optimistically 3 options to choose from, those being WCW, WWF, and ECW. You know, through the 90s and early 2000s, Paul Bearer is probably going to be the number 1 on anybody's list. You know, or let's say 90% of people's list if they're fans.
You know, I think something we should point out right here, since it is, you know, the 30-year anniversary of The Undertaker and he's finally retiring, all 3 of our lists in some way connect to The Undertaker and a storyline. I mean, I think that just goes to show what a force he was in this business.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. It really is telling that he's touched all 3 of our lists here. And in my case, it's to rule something out because Paul Bearer, like I said, was obviously that fucking good. It's to be assumed. I have to make an exception to get away from him.
I haven't heard your list yet, but it's a great idea because it's one of those things that's really been watered down these days in modern wrestling is the role of the manager along with some other things. But man, they've really just watered that down.
Yeah.
And I mean, the manager is just a way to really push over, and The Undertaker, I don't think is an example of this, but could really help push a guy that's not great on the mic.
Yeah.
So you can get a great manager. If this guy's good in the ring, you could make it work for a long time.
Yeah. Yep. And that's something that really, like you say, we had fallen to the wayside by the time we got to where we started watching as kids, A manager was a much, much bigger fixture in the territory system. And while, a manager, or in this case, a valet, in my breakdown here, just to throw it out there, I'm considering a manager and a valet the same thing.
I'd agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, unless we're talking like, say, a Miss Elizabeth, who is just there to ride the Macho Man's massive steroid-built shoulders down to the ring and shit like that. A lot of the women helped out. What's that?
Steroids? What are you talking about? That's all Slim Jim muscle. A lot of protein in those Slim Jims.
He's just getting his supplements from Russ Greenberg.
But here we go. So my personal top 3 favorite managers that aren't Paul Bearer. Number 3, Jackie. Miss Jacqueline Moore. I became a fan of her during her run as a manager for Mark Marrow in the WWF. She was chosen as kind of an opposite to Sable there. And for me personally, it's very telling because I remember most of the stuff that Jackie did for Mark Marrow, but I remember very little of Mark Marrow. I did not give a shit. But God damn it, I remember Jackie. So, of course, we got our first glimpse of Jackie as an assistant in one of Double J Jeff Jarrett's earliest vignettes, but Jackie had been in the business for a while. As a matter of fact, Jackie is number 3 on this list because, as much as I really liked her contributions as a manager, and the fact that I hated Sable, she spent more time as an active competitor than she did as a manager. She did manage Harlem Heat in WCW, Mark Marrow in the WWF, and then a handful of people that I don't really know in TNA. Her Wrasslin achievements just can't be ignored. They overshadow her career as a manager. Over her career as a wrestler, she has held the World Wrestling Council's Women's Championship once, the United States Wrestling Association Women's Championship 14 times, the Universal Wrestling Federation Women's World Championship once, the WWF's Women's Championship twice, the WWE Cruiserweight Championship once, and is a 2016 inductee into the WWE Hall of Fame. Much bigger as a wrestler than she was as a manager, but goddammit, I love me some Miss Jackie.
And Joe, you just in our little texting thread we have going, you just said that there's going to be a permanent or a physical Hall of Fame in Florida, correct?
Right, yeah. Yeah, Ric Flair kind of spoiled that. They asked him for one of his robes for the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
So,
well, cool.
Yeah,
That's pretty neat.
On it. Yeah.
Well, here is where you guys are once again going to see my cult fandom here, because we're going to take it to the streets of Philadelphia for numbers 2 and 1. Number 2 on my list of personal favorite managers that aren't Paul Bearer. Number 2 is the Queen of Extreme, Francine.
Ooh.
So in the most perfect origin story ever, Francine Fournier was a teenage Catholic schoolgirl when she became a wrestling fan. That is no bullshit. That's absolute truth. After graduation, she worked at an insurance company and one day saw an ad on TV for the House of Hardcore. This was the pro wrestling school run by ECW. And then the rest is history. Her first in-ring experience was portraying a guest timekeeper who ends up getting chokeslammed by the wrestler 911. So, just to reiterate here, Francine was not only a gorgeous woman, but she was professionally trained and entered into the professional business taking a hard bump by wrestler 911. She was not just eye candy. Supposedly, early in her career, she was approached by the WWF to be Sister Love, a valet to Brother Love. Wow. Supposedly. That's her claims. Nobody has ever substantiated that. I'm happy she turned it down, personally. Her first official managed talent was Stevie Richards, a favorite of mine and somebody that can lay out one mean motherfucking super kick, referencing your list there. That was the Stevie kick was his finishing move, and he was like fucking butter with it. He did it very well. But with Stevie Richards, this is where she started her feud with fellow ECW manager Beulah McGillicuddy. In what became an eternal storyline in ECW, the two would never get over the feud. She managed the tag team The Pitbulls, which I watched earlier tonight, and then one of their November to Remember showings. And she went on to her most famous stable and my personal favorite managerial collaboration, managing Shane Douglas and the Triple Threat, consisting of Douglas, Chris Candido, and Bam Bam Bigelow, 3 figures that we're watching right now in their proto forms back in WWF. As ECW grew and changed over the late 90s, she went on to manage Tommy Dreamer. She beat Steve Corino in a singles matches. She managed Raven, and finally Just Incredible until ECW closed up in 2001. After that, Francine went to TNA, which I did not watch and have never seen. For the record, I haven't seen a single minute of TNA wrestling, so it's not just her stuff. I haven't seen any of it. And then the indie circuit as a manager and wrestler. She came out with Shane Douglas at the 2005 ECW reunion show Hardcore Homecoming and at the WWE ECW One Night Stand pay-per-view. This time to once again backstab Tommy Dreamer and get into it with Beulah McGillicuddy. Francine signed on with the ECW brand of WWE, managing Balls Mahoney, and was released in 2006. Aside from attending occasional ECW reunion shows and conventions, Francine has been enjoying her retirement and is still hot as hell. I think the best way to put it for me was that as a teenager, Francine was my anti-Sable. So, back then, I was not a fully grown man. I thought with my wiener quite a bit, but I couldn't get over the fact that I hated Sable and I thought she was stupid. Turn the channel over to ECW, and here you have Francine, somebody that fit in perfectly with what she was doing there. She looked great, but she was professionally trained. She could take bumps. She could dish out shit. For God's sakes, Bam Bam broke Francine's pelvis once in a press slam. So all I'm saying is that in the world of female managers and valets, there's the eye candy, and then there's the annoying bitches that just stand there and yell. But Francine was the real deal. She was a gorgeous woman that had trained to be a professional and obviously loved what she did. I fucking love Francine. I'd marry her if I could.
Jeez, I think we should probably just erase all of that because poor Francine is probably going to have to go away in hiding for a little bit.
Wouldn't be the first time I've received stalker allegations about the shit that we talk about here on the podcast. You assholes. All right. And number 1. This one was a very special place in my heart, so unfortunately I've got quite a bit to say about it. I apologize to you in advance. Number 1, Bill Alfonso. So Bobby Heenan's managerial career was over by the time I found wrestling. Like I said earlier, we missed the territories and when managers were pretty significant. I was never able to see Jim Cornette in the 80s with the Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express. By the time he got to WWF, they'd watered him down and forced him into the PG, at that time, merchandising mold, and he just wasn't the same. As a kid, I didn't get to see a lot of managers in general. I vaguely remember Brother Love. I vaguely remember Cornette from his time with Yokozuna as a kid. I mean, obviously I'm getting freshened up on it now while we're watching these episodes. And again, aside from Paul Bearer, that's about it for managers. Sure, there were valets like Miss Elizabeth and heat-seeking valets like Luna Vachon and Sunny, but my first full experience both on television and live in person with a true heel manager was Bill Alfonso. I can still hear that fucking whistle in the back of my head, like just ringing in my ears. So Fonzie, which is what Rob Van Dam always liked to call him, started out as a referee. We saw some of his matches in the WWF here on Wrasslin Raw back in 1993, including WrestleMania 9 for Undertaker versus Giant Gonzalez. During this early phase of his career, Fonzie worked as the quote-unquote official for every major American wrestling promotion. Fonzie was introduced to ECW as a troubleshooting referee by Shane Douglas in 1995, with the gimmick of strict enforcement of the rules and disqualifications for wrestlers when they tried to use chairs or weapons. And that was something, obviously, that the ECW crowd did not like at all, so he really started getting his heat then. After an in-ring feud with ECW founder Todd Gordon, Fonzie was stripped of his refereeing duties and took on the job of managing Taz, being part of a year-long winning streak with him. This is where I first discovered the joys of hating Bill Alfonso. During this time, Taz feuded with Sabu, And in the midst of that feud, Fonzie turned on Taz when Taz started getting over big time, now managing Sabu. And I was very surprised to find out that as well as managing Sabu, there in the ring, he actually also literally managed Sabu, like his finances, his road trips, all of that shit. We hear about managers kind of going above and beyond, Mr. Fuji wiping ass. And it's nice to hear that this is something that still existed in the late 90s with Fonzie here,
Yeah, Paul Bearer was kind of like that too. He booked all the hotels and shit for Undertaker.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, we really didn't get managers. So to find somebody that I loved as a manager, and then in my research here to find out that he was actually managing his talent, that was pretty fucking cool to learn. So now managing Sabu, both in the ring and literally managing Sabu's finances for him, Fonzie became an even more famous mouthpiece. He was doing yelling, he was whistling, he was the voice of the homicidal, suicidal, genocidal madman. Rob Van Dam then wanted Fonzie as his manager, and the three teamed up in what, to me, in my adolescent world, must have been the 90s version of Cornette and the Express. As well as managing the tag team of Sabu and RVD, Fonzie managed RVD into the longest ever reign as ECW television champion. In 1997, Fonzie went through the craziest match of his life in an intergender tag team match. He was squaring off against Beulah McGillicuddy, and the teams were Fonzie and RVD versus Tommy Dreamer and Beulah. During the course of that match, Fonzie got some color from a baking tray that had a little too much edge to it and ended up bleeding a legitimate gusher, resulting in a hospital trip and treatment for blood loss. Paul Heyman liked to hype that up as the time that Fonzie lost a third of the blood in his body. He hyped the shit out of it, and he wasn't lying, though. That's what happened. Fonzie maintained until the end of ECW, and like a lot of other talent, fell to the wayside when the WWE absorbed ECW. He came back for the One Night Stand reunion pay-per-view in 2005, and then in most of the ECW reunion shows afterwards. An interesting side note that I found out while putting this together is that Fonzie appeared as the defendant on an episode of Judge Mathis, and the plaintiff was fellow wrestling manager / valet Missy Hyatt, who accused Fonzie of damaging her Porsche. I did not get a chance to watch that, although I wanted to very badly before this.
Unacceptable.
Missy was awarded $500. So I loved watching Bill Alfonso on TV. He was an energetic, annoying little bastard that you couldn't help but hate. And as such, he was the perfect example of what a heel manager could be. He really opened my eyes to how much a manager could do to add a little something to the talent. This only became more when I saw him at live ECW shows back in the day, and I was at a couple down in Pittsburgh at the David L. Lawrence Convention Center. His managed talents were amazing in the ring, and in likewise fashion, Fonzie was amazing outside the ring, embodying the non-wrestling aspect of ECW that had hooked me. The frenetic energy of excitement and chaos, like a rabid squirrel squealing and running around the ring the whole time. To this day, when I inevitably create the tag team of RVD and Sabu on WWE video games, I always name them Fonzie's Finest. Because while the in-ring work might be on the wrestlers, they were always brought to me by Bill Alfonso. And that, gentleman, is my Mount Crushmore.
Yeah, I gotta say, I know very little about him. I mean, I certainly remember him because I did watch ECW from time to time, but a lot of your number 2 and number 3 are certainly memorable.
There's 4 reasons for that.
Well, and I like the fact that it's called your favorite managers other than Paul Bearer.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
Automatically placing him as the greatest ever.
Yeah.
Well, like I said earlier, in a view of the 90s, which is generally what I try to think in terms of, that's when I grow up watching it.
How could we not?
Yeah, exactly. Who else was really there in the 90s? And keeping in mind, I wasn't a huge WCW fan. I didn't really start watching it until close to the end.
Yeah, other than Jim Cornette, there's really nobody. I mean, yeah. And like you said, that's not even Jim Cornette's prime managing years. Yeah. So, yeah.
All right. Well, I hope you all have enjoyed our Mount Crushmores this year. I've enjoyed you guys' Mount Crushmores, and I look forward to sitting down with you and discussing SummerSlam 95 next week. Are you guys ready for that?
Oh, yes, definitely looking forward to it. After we found out some of these matches, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ready to bow down to the king.
I got to tell you, I'm still riding high from that Bulldog heel turn last week. That was some good shit, pal.
Fantastic. What a Christmas gift.
All right. Well, that's it, folks. We're done with this one. I want to thank you again for joining us, and if you like what we're doing here and want to connect with us, you can find us on every major social media and podcast subscription platform by searching up the handle Wrasslin Raw. That's WRASSLINRAW. While you're there, don't forget to click subscribe to get every episode of Wrasslin Raw coming to you every week. Give us a 5-star review. Let your friends know about the fastest growing wrestling podcast in the world. Next week on Wrasslin Raw, we're going to take a look at SummerSlam 95. So, for Joe and Ryan, I'm Jason, and this has been Wrasslin Raw.